It's impressive when you look back at some of the players of yesteryear. You start to look at how they played, what sort of styles they had, and what kind of unique skill sets that they brought to their teams that were completely ahead of the curve and absolutely underutilized. And it hurts, because you know if they had started playing like a decade later, that they would have been something truly special in the NFL. I don't think it's a stretch to suggest that if you were somehow able to time travel and show even the biggest football fan back in the 50s and 60s tape from a modern NFL game, that they would hardly have a clue as to what they were watching. I mean, the game has changed an insane amount, and as a result, different kinds of players are way more valuable and effective. Cough, cough, I'm looking at you, dual threat quarterbacks and pass-catching halfbacks. So let's take a look back at some of these semi-forgotten players of yesteryear that would have been stars in today's game. And listen, quickly, before we get started, that is not to say that the guys on this list were not good or even great players back in their day. But man, to watch them play within the confines of today's game would sure be something else. It feels like Reggie Bush is probably the most natural place to start a list like this. It's hard to not think back to his days at USC when he was quite literally one of the most explosive and accomplished collegiate running backs of all time. Well, accomplished to anyone who has a bit of common sense and doesn't pay attention to the NCAA's ridiculous vacates. But I digress, because the point is, Bush was on another level in college. But for whatever reason, it just didn't quite translate at the NFL level. And again, that's not to say he was a pure bust or anything like that. Not by a long shot. I mean, Bush had nearly three 1,000-yard rushing seasons, despite never eclipsing 227 carries in a single season. He had a solid 4.3 yards per attempt for his career and racked up loads of receiving yards out of the backfield, including 742 during his rookie year. Which leads me to my point about him being ahead of his time, and just how exciting he would have been to watch if he got drafted in today's game instead. This is a guy that had next-level elusiveness and a big, strong frame. People forget, but Reggie Bush is 6 feet and played at around 210 pounds. Can you imagine him catching passes out of the backfield in Kyle Shanahan's offense? And maybe, I don't know, not being run up the middle every other play when there was clearly so much more to his game? Sean Payton has clearly figured it out nowadays with the way that he uses Alvin Kamara. But man, did he ever do Reggie Bush a disservice. And the weird part about this one is that the man caught 88 passes out of the backfield in his rookie season. That number was basically unheard of at the time, but for some reason, his targets and receptions flattened out after that. Nothing like using a potentially generational athlete incorrectly and depriving the fans. Alright, staying in the realm of running backs who would have been absolutely electric in the modern NFL, making plays in space and catching passes out of the backfield. How about Philadelphia Eagles legend Brian Westbrook and speedy Tampa Bay Buccaneer and Atlanta Falcons running back Warrick Dunn? Again, neither of these fellas were slacks during their playing days. Dunn took home Rookie of the Year honors and was a 3-time Pro Bowler. Westbrook had 2 Pro Bowl selections and even made an All-Pro team. So it isn't like these guys were nobodies. But similar to what I said about Reggie Bush, it would have been pretty awesome to see how their skill sets would translate to the modern professional game. I mean, people around the NFL were even doubting Dunn coming out of college despite having a glowing character profile, running a 4.28 second 40-yard dash and having been a 3-time 1,000-yard rusher at Florida State in college. All because he was, at the time, considered to be undersized at 5'7", which sounds kind of ridiculous when you're talking about running backs. Nevertheless, Dunn was a contributor immediately, taking 224 carries at 4.4 yards per attempt, narrowly missing the 1,000-yard threshold in his rookie season. He also added 462 receiving yards at 11.8 yards per reception, so maybe, I don't know, maybe they should have used him a little more in the passing game. I guess it's only my 2 cents, but it seems ridiculous that a player like Warrick Dunn, who averaged 8.5 yards per reception for his career, was never an 80 or 90 reception back, especially since he got to Atlanta and was paired up with Michael Vick. Scheming him into the pass game for some quick hits would have served the explosive but inconsistent quarterback very well. Instant offense instead of taking unnecessary risks risks down the field. Westbrook, on the other hand, got a little bit more play in the passing game. There were 2 seasons in the middle of his career, unsurprisingly 2 of the most productive, in which he was targeted over 100 times. And all he did was turn out 699 and 771 receiving yards at nearly 10 yards a pop, in addition to rushing for 1,217 and 1,333 rushing yards. Thank God that Andy Reid started to see the writing on the wall and shifted his offensive philosophies the way that the game was trending. But you have to think, if he was used in this sort of role for the entirety of his career, that Westbrook might have been a legit Hall of Famer instead of just an Eagles legend. Pass-catching running backs weren't the only offensive threats not to be schemed for correctly in earlier iterations of the NFL. How about some of the stud slot receivers of yesteryear, who NFL coaches refused to appreciate and utilize properly? Guys like Wayne Chrebet and Ernest Givens, who for all that they accomplished during their NFL careers, might have truly been superstars in the modern NFL, at least with the way that the slot receiver role has evolved over the past couple of decades. Chrebet, a 5'10" wide receiver, played all 11 of his NFL seasons for the New York Jets, and during that time he emerged as one of the most important players in the team's offense, and really a fan favorite for his gritty performances on the field. Fans were also enamored with Chrebet's admittedly compelling underdog sort of persona and backstory. Chrebet played his college ball at Hofstra University on Long Island, New York, where he enjoyed a very productive career despite not having the quintessential pro receiver build. Despite setting several school and 1 AA record, Chrebet was completely overlooked as a pro prospect. He was even cut from a CFL tryout after 1 day. New York, at the time, practiced at Hofstra, and the shifty wide receiver was able to secure a tryout, an opportunity that he clearly made the most of. Over the next 11 years, Chrebet would have become one of the most reliable pass catchers the league, and certainly the Jets, had ever seen, catching 580 passes, 41 touchdowns, and hauling in 7,365 receiving yards. What was even more impressive, and honestly is a huge indicator of just how effective Chrebet might have been in today's NFL, is the fact that 379 of his 580 catches were for first down conversions on 3rd down. 65%! That is insane! Imagine the numbers he might have put up in a modern pass-heavy offense, where teams are not only willing to, but many are focused on targeting slot receivers underneath on early downs as a complement to the rush game. Also, as an aside, because he played for the New York Jets, an organization steadfastly riddled with dysfunction, his career spanned 2 owners, 13 quarterbacks, and several different head coaches. I say this to say that Chrebet really made the most of his limited opportunities time and time again. And it would have been amazing to see what he could have done with someone like Sean McVay designing plays for him. Now, even before Chrebet made the improbable leap to the NFL, Ernest Givens was laying down the foundation for the slot receiver as a member of the then Houston Oilers in the run-and-shoot offense. When he retired, Givens held the franchise record for most receiving yards with 7,935 and receptions with 542. Although he was only once a 1,000-yard receiver, Givens was, however, a 2-time Pro Bowl selection because of his production in those high-powered Houston offenses. And all of his numbers would have likely spiked in a more modern offense, especially considering Givens' knack for reading defenses and settling into soft spots to make catches. A hugely valuable skill in today's game. Staying with pass catchers, but moving from the slot to tight end, how about Ben Coates, the New England Patriots tight end who put up astronomical numbers as a tight end in the 1990s. I mean, in 1994, he hauled in 96 catches for 1,174 yards and 7 touchdowns. He even ran one in on the ground. That sounds a hell of a lot more like one of today's freak athlete tight ends than the traditional burly blocking type guys that we associate with that era of football. Coates is just unlucky that he missed the Brady Belichick dynasty because, his athleticism would have allowed him to absolutely flourish in that offense. I mean, we might be talking about a first ballot Hall of Fame kind of career. Alright, moving on from the players catching the ball to the ones throwing it. Much has been made in the last 10 years or so about the emergence of the dual-threat quarterback. The Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Pat Mahomes type that can make plays with their legs in addition to being able to sling it. Whether that be scampering for first downs or extending a play so that a wide receiver can get open down the field. In fact, I would not be shocked if in the next 10 to 15 years, the traditional stationary QB, like the Mannings or Tom Brady, who could never do much outside the pocket, become entirely obsolete. But back in the day, the opposite was true. Teams were terrified to take a chance on these running quarterbacks. And when they did, the team's coaches were so rarely willing to run an offensive system that leveraged the quarterback's unique skill sets that the dual-threat QBs who did earn starting opportunities often struggled. Think about quarterbacks like Vince Young and Kordell Stewart. Two guys who had absolutely epic college careers and were even taken relatively high in the NFL draft. Stewart in the second round by the Steelers and Young third overall by the Tennessee Titans. Yet, for some reason, neither team completely committed to their uniquely talented players. Rather, they just slotted them into whatever archaic offense that they typically ran. We saw this happen to Vince in particular when he played for Jeff Fisher, whose traditional style was a huge mismatch with Young, and in many ways undid some of the early success that he had in his career. Last, but certainly not least, we have two players on the defensive side of the ball that could have almost certainly taken their games to the next level in a more modern NFL. Dan Wilkinson and Javon Curse. At 6 foot 4 inches and well over 320 pounds, Wilkinson was a mountain of a man who played defensive tackle. First for the Cincinnati Bengals, who selected him first overall in the '94 NFL Draft, then for Washington, Detroit, and finally Miami. Curse, on the other hand, had a much different build. He stood at 6 foot 5 inches and weighed in at nearly 270 pounds of pure muscle. He was extremely physically gifted, and sort of a precursor to the Jadeveon Clowney, Nick Bosa freak athlete pass rusher we've come to know in the modern NFL. While Curse and Wilkinson had different play styles, the fact of the matter is that what both of them did best, wreaking havoc in opposing backfields, is extremely important in the modern NFL. With all the protections that we've seen evolve from offensive players in recent years, a premium has been placed on players who can get after the quarterback or ball carrier. Otherwise, the complex plays that modern offenses love to draw up have a chance to develop, and the players at the second and third levels of the defense are put in a very challenging situation. The point being, both Javon Curse and Dan Wilkinson, while successful during their respective times, could have been truly elite superstars in the modern game. But which former NFL player do you think would be best suited for today's NFL? Join us in the comments section below. If you like this video and learned a thing or two, clicking the like button helps out a ton. And hey, we appreciate it. If this is your first time coming around to TPS though, subscribing is a great idea, because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.